Saints Row 1 Stillwater is one of, if not the quintessential open-world cities that gamers desire to explore and flourish in. Composed of dozens of neighborhoods, 12 to 13 unique locations per district, and countless NPCs and vehicles, Stillwater quickly proved to be one of the most enduring challenges Volition has ever faced. Being the 15th anniversary of our beloved series, I thought we should show our respect to the blood, sweat, and tears the studio faced and take a look at the development and evolution of Saints Row 1 Stillwater. To help me with such a massive task, YouTuber Badger Goodger has offered to accompany me in this video with his vast research and expertise of the city. Badger, is there anything you'd like to add before we get started?
Stillwater will always hold a special place in my heart. I first played Saints Row in early 2008 when my brother gave me a copy to play while I was waiting for GTA 4 to come out. That was still several months away from release at the time, so Stillwater was the first true 7th gen open world experience for me. Right from the start, I liked that they decided to set Saints Row in a different area than what you would typically find in popular media at the time. Not another East Coast or West Coast setting in the same cities we've seen thousands of times before, but in the Midwest in a completely fictional city, inspired by real locations around the US, but not an exact replica of any one place in particular. But because I'm quite curious about how things can change during the development of a title, and because I have prior experience with researching how the maps of the Grand Theft Auto franchise have evolved throughout their development, then I knew that the same thing had to have happened for Stillwater when they were first creating Saints Row. I wanted to know what the city was like when they were first coming up with it, and how the city in earlier builds might have differed from what we got in the final product. And I want to thank Saints Godzilla for allowing me the opportunity to really dive deeply into this. So thank you, Saints Godzilla.
Awesome. With all that said, let's journey back to early 2003. Volition has just begun pre-production on a PlayStation 2 title known as Bling Bling, which would eventually move development over to the Xbox 360 and become the Saints Row we know today. According to Hayes Thompson's 2007 GDC Saints Row Cityscape, Volition knew early on they wanted to make a realistic setting in an extremely dense inner city. Their primary goals were to make a city with more enterable buildings and gameplay per foot, more details and unique art, and no duplication of city blocks. Though Stillwater wouldn't start being developed till much later, we could see through early concept art that the map was going to take heavy inspiration from real cities like Chicago and Detroit. During this time, the city was yet to be called Stillwater. Through much of the game's early pre-production, the city was originally referred to as Stevenson. When the name was eventually changed to Stillwater, it still had the second L, though sometime after the game's reveal in 2005, the L was dropped and the rest is history. As the size, length, and varied locations were under deep discussion, an early 4-block section of the city was made to help test gameplay and hardware limitations. The earliest look we have at this small section of the city comes from 3 months into Volition's first vertical slice known as Phase 3. For context, each month of work during the vertical slice was categorized into a phase, hence the number 3. From the limited gameplay, it appears that Phase 3 was during the early period when Saints Row was still in development for PlayStation 2. From the look of the surroundings, it appeared to be a flat suburban area with inspirations from Chicago and Detroit bleeding through. Something interesting to note is that there was multiple subway station entrances. We know in Saints Row 2 that Volition had big plans for the underground interiors, even beyond what we saw in the final game. Perhaps Volition was experimenting with underground locales during this phase, or these stations were merely cosmetic. Also, something quite impressive for such an early test is that the map had a functioning L train. Some other notable spots are these scattered mechanic shops called Stop and Chop. It's speculated that Stop and Chop was the original concept for rim jobs and was possibly meant as a jab at Grand Theft Auto's Pay and Spray. Though the shop doesn't make an appearance in the final version of Stillwater, it did however make a small cameo in the CG announcement trailer and was even recycled for the vehicle upgrade location in the multiplayer mode Blinged Out Ride. In fact, it seems many multiplayer maps use assets seen in earlier builds of the game that were removed from the final Stillwater. As the vertical slice continued, the test map would continue to gradually evolve. Sadly, we don't have any footage of Phase 4, but according to Volition's principal programmer Mike Flaving, Phase 4 didn't look much different from Phase 3. Phase 5, on the other hand, well...
By the time development of Stillwater made it to Phase 5 around May of 2004, things were slowly resembling the final game a little bit more, but the map itself remained as the 4-block test area. Greg Donovan's Vertical Slice Challenge presentation at the 2015 Game Developers Conference showed off some test footage taken on Phase 5's map. The frame rate obviously wasn't very good, but it still served as a way to show off some of the game's core mechanics, especially now that the project had changed platforms. Early on, Saints Row was being developed for the PlayStation 2, but they eventually switched over to the Xbox 360, which at the time hadn't even been released yet. You can tell just by looking at the difference in graphics and gameplay mechanics between the Phase 3 footage and the Phase 5 footage. Phase 3 looks like what you would get out of the PS2 for a game like this. Phase 5, on the other hand, looks very next-gen for its time. And this was around the stage where things were coming along a little more nicely despite the frame rate.
That rather brisk frame rate has not been altered or sped up in any way, I promise.
The console commands in the final game still reference Phase 5 when loading the world, so you can tell that this served as the point from which they would continue to build off of in the engine. Now, because the Phase 5 map was only developed as a test area and was not meant as a location to be included in the final map, we can't exactly compare it to anywhere that exists in the current iteration of Stillwater. It just resembles a generic industrial area. I'm not sure if any assets from Phase 5 were even reused in the game. Things like the streetlights and buildings all look different, and businesses like the Genitile Corp and JSS Shipping Company are nowhere to be found in Stillwater.
Once pre-production for the game was finally complete, the studio quickly realized the new Xbox hardware they were novice to would cause certain limitations in terms of Stillwater's design. Therefore, it was decided that aircrafts would be cut due to limited time and world streaming difficulties, plus the city would be the size of Vice City with geographical boundaries instead of being an island world. This is also the point where Volition moved away from developing the game in monthly phases to 8 to 12-week milestones. There would be a total of 9 milestones reached before the game was launched. Anyway, this is when the first initial concepts of Stillwater were made. At a brief glance, they look fairly similar to what we see in the final game, but there are some fascinating differences.
Going by some of the earliest concepts and renders, Stillwater retained the same familiar shape and layout, with two sides of the city split up by a large river. We can tell even from the very first concept that was drawn up that they didn't really deviate from this design. But what that concept and other early versions of the map show us is that the city still changed quite a lot during development. It was definitely a little bit larger. Not by much, but during the 10th anniversary stream when someone asked how much of the city was cut during development, Volition's Mitch Cronin mentioned that about 6% of Stillwater was cut completely. Let's take a look first at what districts were removed completely. The earliest concept shows districts called Park, Mall, Junkyard, Trailer Park, Train Station, and Utilities. Another early map refers to the area around the Altor Dome as a racetrack, and you can clearly see the track in question to the left of the stadium. I suppose the Arena District would have included both the Altor Dome and this racetrack, but given how the racetrack was gone by the time another early map was shown off in the November 2005 issue of GamePro magazine, it's safe to assume that this was probably one of the first areas to be cut. Another area present on one of the earlier maps and missing from the GamePro map was the park. This would have been immediately north of the Museum District, and I guess the district name is pretty self-explanatory as to what would have been there. In this early map that's available on the Saints Row wiki, you can clearly see where it would have gone and how it would have looked from a top-down perspective. It's pretty huge for a park in an open-world game, and it probably would have felt a little more remote compared to other parts of the city. There might possibly be some early concept art of this area inside of the Legalese in Encanto. Also in North Stillwater, a shopping mall next to the Suburbs District was cut. Going by the 10th anniversary stream, it would appear that the mall was cut probably around the time of or shortly after E3 2005. It's also not present on the GamePro map from November of that same year. And the suburbs still had a lot of changes to go through before they resembled anything close to the final area. According to Mitch Cronin and Mike Flavin, the suburbs was one of the last two districts to be finished, the other one being Chinatown, which I'll talk about a bit later. South of the Altor Dome would have been the Junkyard and the Trailer Park. The road layouts changed to incorporate the storage facility and movie theater that eventually wound up in roughly the area where these two cut districts were supposed to go. But there might be a remnant of the trailer park in the final game. Not far from the Altor Dome is a trailer that belongs to Helmers, a pimp who gives you a set of snatch missions that originate from his trailer. His trailer is in kind of an odd place. It's just there off a random dirt road in the middle of nowhere. Given the proximity to the Altor Dome, it's very likely that these missions would have originated from the trailer park. And when the area was cut, they still needed to keep at least one trailer for this activity. Further east of here, the Barrio District was changed quite a bit, and half of it almost seemed to be an extension of the industrial areas. The train station is in what we now know as Southern Cross, and a utilities area is what later became Cecil Park. The main terminal building for the train station itself does exist in the final game. It's this place, right near On Track. This place definitely looks like it would be a train station. To me, it kinda resembles the Illinois Terminal, which is not far from where Volition are located in Champaign, Illinois. But all that's left of this train station area is this terminal building. The beta map shows an entire rail yard in place of the parking lot and everything south of there. And east of there is the utilities district. This had to have been an additional industrial area, and if you compare the beta map to the final one, nothing in this area actually resembles what we ended up with. This was later changed to be a much more urbanized area and part of the Barrio district rather than being an industrial district. Speaking of which, the Barrio district as it existed in the beta was completely different from what we wound up with in the same area. None of the road layouts in the area that we saw in the beta map even match up with the area that we got currently. It clearly underwent a lot of changes during development. You can see that the area that the Lopez mansion is a part of looked like it had more roads going through it. I wouldn't be surprised if it was meant to be part of a bigger residential neighborhood. Maybe it was going to be a gated community with multiple homes, including the Lopez residence, before they cut everything else out. Similar to the single trailer off of a dirt road near the El Toro Dome after the trailer park was cut, in this neighborhood we're left with a gated community that's only got one road and one home. Chinatown was also quite different in the beta. Going by the map shown in the CGI trailer, in the northern part of the neighborhood near the expressway, it looked like there was a small residential area. There was a baseball diamond, a cul-de-sac, and what looks like a bunch of little houses. I'm guessing it would have been like a more inner-city residential area. Because Flavin mentioned that this was the other area that was one of the last locations to be finished, it's easy to see why it went through so many changes. Even the park isn't present yet, there's just more streets and buildings in its place. The Saints Row district might look different at first glance, but the biggest change is on the far eastern edge of the map. The expressway doesn't run through it. The road layouts have changed a little bit, and that's about it. Very minor changes, but it's the district the game was named after, so why not bring it up at least, huh? Finally, one last area that changed drastically between the beta and final version of the map was the airport. Wardell Airport in Saints Row 1 is like any other municipal airfield that you'll find in smaller cities, kinda like Willard Airport in Champaign, Illinois. By the way, Wardell is an anagram of Willard, in case you were wondering where they got the name from. But originally, the airport was a lot larger. It was pretty much a major international airport at this stage of development. But I can see why it was trimmed down to just one runway and no terminal buildings. What's the point of having an airport this big if there aren't any flyable vehicles in the game? They knew early on that airplanes wouldn't be in the game because they wouldn't have enough time to implement them, and they were saved for Saints Row 2 instead. And in Saints Row 2, among all the other new and improved neighborhoods, we ended up getting a bigger airport after all, and a trailer park, and a shopping mall. Areas that were cut from the first game weren't gone forever. In fact, I suspect that a lot of the assets for all three of these areas that were in SR2 might have originally been made for SR1. There's an airport terminal map in Saints Row 1's multiplayer that obviously served as the base for the terminal building interior in SR2. But if you look at the beta map of the airport, the overhead view of the terminal building there matches up almost completely with the terminal in SR2. I would not be surprised if assets for the trailer park and the mall were also both originally made for the first game before they got cut, and were then reintroduced into the second game.
According to Saints Row's data files, there are more unused district and neighborhood names that were either placeholders for existing locations or districts we sadly don't have any further information on. But to name the ones we know, Ashland Arena eventually changed to the El Toro Dome. South Seaport was an early name for the Docks and Warehouse District. Rebidoux in the Red Light District was initially called Liesel. An in-game billboard implies the Somerset neighborhood was once called Sunset. And according to a news report that could be heard after completing the mission 3rd Street Vice Kings, Noob Hill was formerly known as Glenville Hills. Jumping ahead to 2005, Saints Row is finally in a state where Volition could show the game publicly at press events and gaming conventions. The most documented footage available from this time comes from 2005's E3. For the event, a single district of Stillwater was shown, but it's quite amazing just how drastic the small location was transformed compared to the final game.
That area was the Red Light District, although looking at the footage taken from this build, things were still a long ways off from being finished. This entire area might have been the first one that was fully designed, and it had quite a lot of differences from the final area. One of the most noticeable ones is the fact that it's much hillier. Streets are running on inclines, buildings are raised. At some points I thought the entire area looked almost walled off, and it looks odd to me. I almost thought that maybe this was why it was flattened out, because it would look kinda ridiculous having this many parking lots and sidewalks there just resting above the street. But this area, along with others, were flattened out because of time constraints. It was easier on the development team to have a flat terrain to design rather than a hilly terrain, and given the deadlines they would have been under, the time it saved made flattening out the area a necessity. Multiple buildings in the district were also rearranged, and when you compare some of the streets to what we see in the final game, it feels a little different. In some places it feels a bit more open, especially the main road between the red light district and the projects leading to the bridge. Turns out this is because the L-train tracks weren't present in this build, so the trains at this point in development had likely not yet been implemented. The footage showing off a liquor store robbery also shows off a couple more changes. The bridge connecting the red light district to downtown at this spot was noticeably shorter in height. And not only that, check out that background. It almost looks like the downtown area is huge and extends out, but this is actually just a backdrop. This was likely done because, for this build, everything west of the red light district was probably unfinished. Rather than having an empty void, they simply placed a backdrop that made it look like downtown was larger.
Some other differences that could be seen in the E3 footage comes from the downtown district. Though only seen from a distance, you could see slight variations in the buildings, but most notable is the bridge connecting the Saints Row district to downtown is missing. It's clear from the initial concepts of the city that this location was always intended to have a bridge, so it likely wasn't finished for this particular build of the game. One final change is the sloppy seconds in the red light district was swapped out for On the Rag in the full release. We can only speculate why this was done, but I'm assuming it made more sense to have the store moved to the Saints Row district and On the Rag was finished and placed here later in development. Surprisingly, this wouldn't be our last look at the 2005 build of Stillwater. It would pop up again in March of 2020 when Volition held a stream revealing gameplay for their cancelled title, Punisher 2: Sandbox Punishment. The initial concept for the sequel was to jump from a linear setting to open world, so the studio used existing assets from Saints Row to show off to their publisher. It doesn't reveal too much that we didn't already know, but it is our cleanest look at the 2005 build. Something else that's surprising about the Punisher footage is that it also shows the old test map from Phase 5. Now, it would be easy to play it off as just another build used to show off their concept, but funny enough, the test map made another short appearance in a 2006 trailer. It's possible that at one point in Saints Row's development, Phase 5's location was going to be incorporated into the full city before it was decided otherwise or proved to be more trouble than it's worth. Anyway, as time grew closer to Saints Row's release, a short demo was put out on August 1st of 2006 to help entice players to buy the game. Even though the demo is running on a near-finished build of the game, there are still quite a handful of noticeable differences in the city. As just one example, there are fairly less barricades and fences scattered around the map. It's likely these were added in the final to stop players from traversing too quickly and causing stress on the world's streaming. Volition's principal artist Frank Marquardt can explain further.
I'm responsible for one of the worst solutions.
Oh no.
In my opinion, in the northern area, if you've ever driven around Stillwater and like you're in this like suburban type of an area and there's just houses, well, you come across this like a street and it just kind of dead ends and there's just a wall. And like like it's like a 3-wall thing, I think.
Yeah.
Just to slow you down.
Okay.
It makes zero sense why this wall exists, but it's because of streaming. And we had to come up with a fast solution and put it in.
Yeah.
And I'm so sorry. I apologize for this terrible art solution. It just
One other difference could be found within the Saints Church. The bulletin board shown in the first Carnali's mission cutscene uses an earlier image of the city compared to the finished version in the full release.
I remember seeing videos of the demo version of Saints Row way back in 2006, and among those videos I remember there being people who were crafty enough to find ways to break past the boundaries that were set to keep you from exploring beyond the Saints Row district. They obviously weren't just going to let you drive all around the city in a free demo copy that would have come with a magazine, but there will always be those brave souls determined enough to find ways to break past the boundaries set by any game and explore the world beyond the invisible walls placed there by the creators. Fortunately for us, the boundaries in the Saints Row demo are almost too easy to break through. One method involves diving out of a car at the right moment, which will result in the player jumping right through the red wall. From there, you're free to roam Stillwater on foot until you come across a part of the city that isn't solid and fall through the map. Another method involves catching a train. If you manage to jump onto the roof and basically become a train surfer, you get to ride around the entire map and see more of the city. But of course, most of it isn't loaded properly. Still pretty neat though.
And there you have the long but fascinating development of Saints Row Stillwater. It's honestly quite amazing the amount of love and care that went into our beloved city. It just goes to show that Volition puts in that little extra effort that can make an average world an unforgettable one. Even 15 years later, there's still a thriving community that has spent countless hours enjoying Stillwater and all its beauty. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. An absolute special thanks goes to Badger Goodger for helping me depart on this special project. Please check out his channel for more professional and high quality content. I would also like to give a special thanks to my Patreon sponsors, John, Scissorp, Delta, Sis121525, Big G, Red Skill 100, Dr. Purple Bunny 78, Gabriel Snyder, and Fluffy Tail. Like always, thank you for watching and happy 15th anniversary to Saints Row.